Shalom and Bruchim Habaim once again to our Kollel, Ahavat Israel of San Diego. We're very pleased to have you aboard. B'ezrat Hashem, the shiurim are being learned and sponsored, B'ezrat Hashem, through the kind people who sponsor these classes, either for Refuah Shalema, B'meira, or other Yeshuot. For everyone that participate, as we know that shiurei Torah, all that participate in shiurei Torah, kol mi shemitztaref b'shiurei Torah, brachot ba'im alav, all the brachot, the blessings will come upon you. And as we know that reheat, Shabbat, we were talking about the Shabbos, the Halakhot Shabbat. We know that the Kihi Mekor HaBracha, that the Shabbat is a source of all blessing, Be'ezrat Hashem, to all of us and to all of Klal Yisrael. We're learning the Halakhot Shabbat, the laws of Shabbat. We have through a full series on the 39 Melachot, Be'ezrat Hashem. So far, we have covered the first 10 melachot. Those were zorea, planting, choresh, plowing, kotzer, reaping and cutting, me'amer, gathering, dash, threshing, zoreh, winnowing, borer, sorting and separating, tochen, grinding, meraked, sifting, lash, which is kneading, and we're now on the next melacha currently, which is called ofeh, and it's referred to as bishul b'Shabbat. Today we're continuing in the melechet ofeh and bishul, the laws of cooking on Shabbat. So the last year was about shihiyah, hatmana, and chazara. That's shihiyah, leaving food cooking before Shabbat. And chazara is reheating foods on Shabbat, putting back a food onto the heat on Shabbat to reheat it. And hatmana, that was wrapping foods to keep them warm. And we gave an overview of all of those three ideas of the dinei shihiyah, hatmana, chazara. And now we're going to be moving to a different area. But those three areas are very hema'od, hashiyat, mana, v'chazara, gadol, v'ktzat mesubach, and they're pretty long and detailed. So he goes back in the sefer later on, and we may or may not go back and delve into the details of those halachot of shiyah, hatmana, and chazara, as he has whole sections on them coming up in the sefer. For today, we're going to be moving on to ma'alot b'midat hachom. That's the different levels of temperatures involved in the laws of cooking on Shabbat. Those are and their applications. So those are kli rishon, kli sheni, and kli shlishi. You probably all have heard about this. אנחנו עושים את השיעור גם למתחילים וגם לבינונים וגם ליודעים ומלומדים. The shiur can be good for beginners, intermediate, and even people who know the halachot. It could be a good chazara. We do half English and half Hebrew for the audience, and I try to switch around. Sometimes I forget, but אנחנו מנסים, משתדלים לעשות את זה גם בעברית וגם באנגלית כמה שאפשר. Okay, so these kli rishon, kli sheni, and kli shlishi. That's how they kacha emadidu et midot hachom, the temperature, the different levels of temperature that a vessel has, and the laws and the applications that apply. So again, kli rishon, kli sheni, and kli shlishi. The kli rishon is the first vessel. That's a pot that's on the fire. The kli sheni would be the second vessel. That's a pot that was on the fire that's been removed from the fire. And the kli shlishi would be a third container that the food was poured into from the second one into a third one. So let's go through each one of these. Be'ezrat Hashem. Yud Beit, ma'alot b'midat hachom. Yesh kama ma'alot u'madrigot b'midat hachom hashonot b'metziutan ושונות גם בדיניהם בנוגע לאיסור בישול בשבת. Ve'eluhain. There are several or a few levels of temperature, of heat, that are different in their mitziyut, that they actually have different temperatures, and they have also different laws that apply to for the prohibition of not cooking on Shabbat. And here they are. Kli Rishon Aleph, Kli Rishon ala Eish. That is the most chamur, the strictest one. Kli Rishon ala Eish, or husar lavarati lachzir ala Eish. So this is a pot that is on the fire, or it was a pot that was on the fire that was taken off the fire, but you still plan to put it back on the fire. This has a din of like the fire itself. Let's see. Kol davar she'asur lasim al gabei ha'esh b'Shabbat, asur liten toch kli rishon ha'omed al ha'esh. Anything that you're not allowed to put on the fire, directly on the fire on Shabbat, you're also not allowed to put into a kli rishon, into a pot that is on the fire. לאו דווקא אם עומד על האש בשעה שנותן שם אותו דבר, אפילו אם הוא הסירו משם מעל האש, אבל דעתו להחזירו על גבי האש, גם חל איסור זה. Not only while the pot is on the flame is it considered a kli rishon, even if it was taken off the flame, but you have intention to put it back on the flame, so the entire time it was considered a kli rishon, is considered like fire itself. אין חילוק בין דבר שאינו מבושל עדיין ובין דבר שכבר מבושל, אפילו דבר יבש, אפילו עדיין חם, שלא שייך שם איסור בישול, שלא באים כאן מצד איסור בישול, אלא משום איסור חזרה. So this idea, this din of not cooking something on a fire, not re-cooking, reheating something that you're allowed to cook or to reheat on Shabbat. But we're not, as we said several times, we're not allowed to reheat those foods in the same way that we do during the week. So during the week, you take a pot, you put it on the fire, and you put the food in the fire, and you turn on the flame. So by Shabbat, they said even with foods that like we learned in the previous shiurim, that ein bishul achar bishul, that there are foods that were cooked one time already, that if they're dry foods or cold foods, liquids that are still warm. So those things are allowed to be recooked, reheated on Shabbat all the way. But we said you can't put them on the fire. So you also cannot put those also into a pot that's on the fire, or a pot that was removed from the fire with intention to put it back on. And this is because it's not from the laws of bishul that we're talking about, of cooking in this case, because we said in bishul, we're allowed to cook these certain foods that we're allowed to cook on Shabbat, like we learned in the last shiurim. So they will be allowed to cook. So why can't I put them in the kli rishon? So this is not the dinei bishul already. This is because of chazara, because we're not allowed to heat something up on Shabbat in the way we do during the week. ועין שם דרך שחלקנו בין אם נותנים לתוך כלי ראשון, אם נותנים על גביו, שזה נקרא רק סמוך לאש, שמותר בדבר יבש שכבר הוא מבושל כל צרכו. And he continues on that all these differentiating factors that we made when you'd be allowed to put something in a place, to heat it in a place where it could heat up, but not in a pot, not into a kli rishon. So Aleph, let's just review each seif as we go. So kli rishon ala eish, we're learning a hot pot is a kli rishon. That's the first vessel that is on the fire. And we went through the three types of vessels. There's the first pot, the second vessel, which would be a kli sheni, and the third vessel, that would be the kli shlishi. So in kli rishon, we said that anything that we're not allowed to put on a fire on Shabbat, we're also not allowed to put into a pot that's on the fire on Shabbat. It doesn't matter if it's still on the fire, we said, or if you removed it with intention to return it to the fire, it's still asur, and that's prohibited to put anything in there on Shabbat. We said it doesn't matter if it's a food that you're allowed to recook or reheat on Shabbat or not. And we gave the bit of the chazara, bishul achar bishul, that there were foods that we learned in previous shiurim that we said that we are allowed to cook, reheat those foods on Shabbat. Like we learned with the dry food that was fully cooked, even if it got cold, or wet food, as long as it's still warm. But those, like we're saying, is you cannot put them into a pot. Even though you can recook them or reheat them, you cannot put them into a pot that's on the fire, into anything, into when it's called a kli rishon. The first vessel, it's a pot on the fire, or it was removed from the fire with intention to put it back. This is because the isur here is chazara. We said, like we learned in the last shiur, that even when it's permissible to recook or reheat something on Shabbat, we still are not allowed to heat it in the normal fashion that we do during the week. So we still need to learn how we can recook and reheat these foods. As we learn, you may put these cookable foods, let's call them cookable foods, that you're allowed to cook, recook, reheat on Shabbat. We said we learned previously you're allowed to put those near the fire or on top of a pot that's on the fire, but not into a pot that is on the flame. Okay, back in the Sefer, Bet. Kli rishon shusar min al ha'esh. That's a kli rishon, a hot pot on the fire that was taken off of the fire. כבר כתבנו שדברים שלא שייך בהם בישול אין מתירים להתנם רק בכלי ראשון שכבר הוסר מעל האש ואין דעתו שוב להחזירו לאש. We already wrote above that we already said that things that you're allowed to recook, things that are lo shayach be'em bishul, it's not relevant, cooking is not relevant to those things on Shabbat. We gave the list. Those are like, again, the dry foods, again, like anything that has ein bishul achar bishul, things that were allowed to recook, reheat on Shabbat. You're only allowed to litnam rak b'kli rishon shekvar husar me'al ha'esh ve'en dato l'shum l'achzir. You're only allowed to put it into a kli rishon, that a pot that was on the fire. It was taken off of the fire permanently. So this pot that was taken off of the fire, הכלי הזה שהוסר מהאש לצמיתות, לא מחזירים אותו לאש. So there you would be allowed, that's a place you would be allowed to reheat these foods. That's one way, that's one place that you would be allowed to reheat. Many other places, like we spoke about, near the fire, on top of another pot on the fire. But you could also put it into a kli rishon, a pot, that hot pot that was on the fire, and that was taken off the fire permanently. So these things that you're allowed to cook on Shabbat, you would be allowed to put it into that pot, that very hot pot that was taken off of the fire. And that could be a very good way to recook, reheat those kinds of foods on Shabbat. אבל דברים שנוהג בהם בישול, אסור להתנם לקדרה זאת. But what about things that could be cooked? That means that you're not allowed to reheat those on Shabbat. Foods that you are not allowed to reheat on Shabbat, you are not allowed to put into that pot. So that's a pot that was on the fire. You took it off the fire permanently. We said you could put in there foods that you're allowed to cook on Shabbat, but you're not allowed to put in there foods that can't be cooked on Shabbat. Why? Because it's hot enough to cook them. And they're going to get cooked. So only things that are cooked once that you're allowed to cook, to reheat, recook, only those you could put into this pot that was taken off of the fire permanently. As we just said, because this hot pot that was taken off the fire, it still can cook foods. So you have a food that you're not allowed to cook on Shabbat. So you just want to, so you can't put it there into this hot pot that was taken off the fire permanently. You can't put it into that pot, even if you're just trying to make it take off the cool. You want to take off the cold. So you want to put it in just for a second, just for a moment, and take it off. You would not be allowed to, because for that moment that you put it in, you would be cooking. those foods, the foods that you're not allowed to reheat, you're not allowed to cook on Shabbat. אמנם רק אוסרים אם יכולים להתחמם שם בכלי ראשון כשיעור יד צוללת בו, אפילו אם רק מקצת מהחתיכה. But this isur that we said with the raw food, again, or a food that's not allowed to be cooked on Shabbat. So you're not allowed, we just said, you're not allowed to put it into that pot. But he said, amnam, this is only asur if the pot is actually hot. So if it was taken off the flame an hour ago and it's not so hot, it's just warm. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the pot is still hot. He says, so then, if the pot is not hot to make something that would be yad soledet, again, one of the temperatures, אחד המידות החום שאנחנו למדנו, בשיעורים הקודמים, that's the temperature of cooking. What is the temperature of cooking? Yad soledet. That's a scalding hand. If your hand would touch it, it would jump away from scalding, and that is yad soledet. That's the temperature of cooking. So he says, so what if this pot, taken off the fire, it's not so hot anymore? It won't get something to yad soledet. So then you would be allowed to put really anything in there because it can't cook anymore. That's what he's saying. If it won't get yad soledet, I mean, so all these times we were learning these kli rishon, kli sheni, and kli shlishi, we're talking about when they're hot. It was taking off the fire, it's a kli rishon, it's hot, and then you pour it into a second vessel, now it's a kli sheni. But we're talking about when they're hot, and that's when they have the isurim, that's when they have the stringencies that we're not allowed to cook at times in these different vessels. But again, the tip is, how he said here, that's talking about when they're hot. So he says water. Therefore, we just said that if you put something into the hot pot, but it won't, the result is not going to be something that's hot, yad soledet, so then it's okay. You can put anything in there. So let's say water. He's saying water here. You want to put cold water, you want to pour cold water into a hot pot. So now the hottest pot, it's cooking, it's cookable, it could cook. It's a hot pot, it was taken off the fire. So you have to have, now I want to pour water in there into the hot pot. Now I can't pour water. If I'm going to cook the water, if I pour water into the hot pot, I'll be cooking the water. But he says if you pour a lot of water into a little bit of hot water, a lot of cold water, or half it's where the result is going to be just warm, and the result won't be a very hot water, so then that's allowed. You're allowed to pour a lot of hot water. A lot of cold water into hot water, a little bit of hot water into a lot of cold water, the same thing. But he says here, מובן שצריך לשפוך הכל בשפיכה אחת, שאם ישפוך רק מעט מעט, אז תתחמם השפיכה הראשונה קודם שיגיעו השאר לכלי ראשון. And so he says, but it goes without saying that you can't pour it, if you want to pour, again, we're pouring a lot of cold water into some hot water that's in a pot that was taken off of the fire. But the pot is hot. So if I pour it little by little, so as I'm pouring, it's going to get cook as I'm pouring. A little bit will get cooked, a little more will get cooked, a little more. So I would have to pour it in that case. If I pour it all in one shot, because the result, nothing is going to get cooked over there. None of the water will be getting cooked when you do it that way. בשעתו נעשה בישול, כן מותר להעמיד בקבוק של משקים, אוכלים בתוך כלי ראשון זה, ממנו יכול לבוא לחום של יד צוללת בו. And he says, therefore, the same idea applies. We said the only time that it's not allowed is if it's going to reach the temperature of yad soledet. It's going to reach the temperature of yad soledet. We said that was 104 Fahrenheit, and there are different opinions, but we're calling it yad soledet. That's what they call it, the chachamim. So we said if it can't reach Yad Soledet, if it's cooled off enough, the pot is already not so hot that it won't make something to the shiur Yad Soledet, so then you're allowed to. So now what if I have a baby bottle with milk, and the milk I'm not allowed to cook on Shabbat. I'm not allowed to cook the milk on Shabbat. But would be allowed to take this bottle, and I would be allowed to put it into this hot pot of water that was taken off the fire, with no intention to put it back on the fire. So now we have this pot of hot water that was taken off of the fire. So he says you'll be able to put a bottle, not necessarily a baby bottle, any bottle of mashkin, of liquids, or a bottle of foods, into this kli. Same idea. What's in the bottle is not going to get cooked to the shiur Yad Soledet bo. It's only going to become warm. So that's why that's allowed. וכיוון שאסור ליתן מים קרים לכלי ראשון אם יש חשש שיתחממו שם כשיעור של יד צוללת בו, יש להימנע בשבת מלפתוח הברז לקח מים מצינור של מים החמים. So here we have the famous issue of the reason why we do not open up the hot water faucet on Shabbat. This exact idea. לא בלבד אם עדיין דולקות האש המחמם את המים, שאז יגרום שיתבשלו המים הקרים הבאים במקום המים החמים שלקח מהמחם הגדול. Not only if the boiler is on and it's going to cause more water to come into the boiler and get cooked in the boiler, אלא אפילו אם כבר כבתה האש גם כן אסור משום שהמים החדשים שבאים למיחם מתחממים בתוך המים שעדיין נשארים במיחם. Even if the boiler is off, no new water will be coming into the boiler when I turn on the faucet. I'm sorry. Yes. So whether the boiler is on or off, it's got hot water in there. It has boiling hot water in your hot water boiler in your home. So even if the boiler is off, you're still not allowed to turn on the hot water faucet. Why? Because it's causing new cold water to come into the boiler, and that new cold water is a little bit at a time. It's going to get cooked as it enters the boiler. And therefore, we do not turn on the hot water faucet on Shabbat, and we only use the cold water faucet on Shabbat. All because of Bishul, of the laws of cooking on Shabbat, that we may not cook the water that will enter the boiler. Okay, let's review bait. Kli Rishon Shusar Min Ha'esh, that this is talking about a pot that was a hot pot on the fire, that it was removed from the fire. A Kli Rishon that was removed from the fire maintains its heat and can cook an uncooked food. As we learned above, things that cooking does not apply to may be put into a pot that was removed from the fire as long as you don't intend to return it to the fire. So we said that's one way that a person could reheat foods on Shabbat, the foods that we learned in the last shiur, the foods that you were allowed to reheat, to recook on Shabbat. This is one way to do it. You would be allowed to put those things into the Kli Rishon that was Husar Min Ha'esh, that was taken permanently off of the fire. But things that are not allowed to be cooked and reheated on Shabbat, that may not be put into this pot. This Isur prohibition applies even if you just want lafik tzinato, just to remove the cold, and you intend to take it out of the pot before it reaches the Yad Soledet. Still, you're not allowed to put it into the Kli Rishon, even after it was removed from the fire, because the Kli Rishon has the temperature to cook an uncooked food. The pot that was on the fire, the first vessel we're calling it, Kli Rishon, has the temperature to cook an uncooked food. So you can only put in there foods that you're allowed to cook and not something that you're not allowed to cook. And again, it was off the fire and with no intention to put it back on the fire. we said that these, and all of these rules that we're saying with the cooking in these vessels, only applies if the pot is indeed hot and can cook something to yad soledet. If you touch the pot, if you feel and you notice that it's cool, it's warm and it's not hot, so then somewhat cooled off. So then you can put anything that you want into there because nothing will be getting cooked in there. Following these rules, we said it's permissible to pour a large amount of cold water into a small amount of hot water, because the water as a whole the resulting water will never reach yad soledet, and it's okay. But we said in that case you would have to pour it all at once, because if you pour it slowly, then the small amount of cold water will get cooked as soon as it hits the pot of hot water. The pot of hot water. Excuse me. We also said this is exactly the reason that we don't open the hot water faucet on Shabbat, because the new water that enters the boiler will get cooked inside the boiler. And therefore, on Shabbat, with regard to the faucet, we only use the cold faucet and we don't open the hot faucet on Shabbat for that reason. Okay, the next one is Gimel. This is Kaf Shemachnisim Lekli Rishon. So what about a serving spoon? A serving spoon is almost like a container in itself. Let's see. הכף שמכניסים לתוך כלי ראשון לכך על ידה המאכל, אם תהיה מונחת שם איזה זמן שתתחמם הכף כשיעור חום כלי ראשון, יש ליתן לדין של כלי ראשון. So it depends. So this spoon, this serving spoon, sometimes it will have a kli rishon status, and sometimes it will have a kli sheni status. So he says, let's see. Im tiyeh munachat sham eize zman. That means the serving spoon, it was left in the hot pot. It's on the fire. It's in the hot pot. The serving spoon is in there. So that spoon is going to get the same temperature as the pot. It's like the pot itself. It's a very hot spoon. Yesh litain ladin shel kli rishon. In that case, you should give the serving spoon the law of a kli rishon, like we learned previously, of a pot that was on the fire. Even though you took it out of the kli rishon, and so now you want to think maybe it's a kli sheni, because it's not a kli rishon. Maybe you think it's a second one, but it was inside the kli rishon and it heated up inside the kli rishon. So we give it a din, we give it the law of a kli rishon to that serving spoon, and anything in that spoon can cook. אפילו אחר שכבר יוצא מהכלי ראשון, ואפילו שגם מותר להחזירה אחר כן לכלי הראשון עם מה שבתוכה, אפילו עם דעתו להחזירה שם גבי האש. He enters here, he entertains the question of, now if you have the serving spoon and you took it out of the pot and you poured soup into a bowl, so now you want to put the serving spoon back into the kli rishon. So he says, Efshar, it could be very possibly that you're allowed to do that. So Sarich Yiyun, this is a complicated question, I guess, of the serving spoon. And we said the serving spoon is complicated in one way. Sometimes it has a din of a kli rishon, sometimes a din of a kli sheni. And now we have this question of whether you're allowed to now put the serving spoon back in the pot to serve more soup. And he says, Efshar, it could be that's okay. What about the other way? אם הייתה שם רק זמן קצר, נותנים על מה שבכף חומרת, אם הייתה שם רק זמן קצר, נותנים על מה שבכף חומרת כלי ראשון, היינו שאסור להראות ממנו על כל מה שאסור להראות גם מכלי ראשון. Even if the serving spoon, he says, was there for a short amount of time, we give it a chumrah, we give it the stringency of a kli rishon. So anything that you would not be allowed to pour from a hot pot onto, you would also not be allowed to pour from this serving spoon onto. As we said, nevertheless, sometimes there is a leniency with the serving spoon, and it's considered a second vessel. That is, if you're, let's say, you're pouring it into a bowl. So now I have the pot of food, I have the pot of soup, let's say, and I have the serving spoon, and I have a bowl. So I want the bowl to be a kalish shlishi, as we're going to see as we go along. We'll see the kalish shlishi eino mevashel. We see a third vessel does not cook. So I want to have my bowl of soup, which should be a third vessel. So I take so from the serving spoon into the bowl should be a third vessel. He says that could be very well. It's okay that in that case you could be lenient, and now you poured from. So we said you can't pour onto foods that you're not allowed to cook on Shabbat from this spoon. But if I pour from the spoon into a bowl, so then let's see. להחשיב אותו רק ככלי שלישי, להתיר לתת לתוכו פת וכולי, עיין לכמה. So I want to put the famous question, may I put my bread, dip the bread into the soup? And we're going to go into this as we go. The kli sheni. We're going to learn kli sheni, and that's what we're learning about the bread in the soup. But we're going to see over there that if it's a kli shlishi, then you would be allowed to put anything into it, unless it's certain types of foods that are kaleh bishul. So this bread is not specifically on the list of the kaleh bishul. So this bread, I'll be allowed to dip it into a soup that's in a third vessel. So we just said for the serving spoon, when you serve it into a bowl, so then for bread, for the purposes of bread, you would be allowed to dip the bread into the bowl of soup. And this is how we do. This is how we see. We're sitting at the Shabbat table, and we see somebody dipping the bread into the soup. That's how it works, because they're considering the bowl of soup now to be a kalish shlishi, a third vessel, because for this case we're going to consider the serving spoon to be vessel number 2 and the bowl to be vessel number 3, and in that case go ahead and dip the bread into vessel number 3. Okay, just reviewing Gimel, the kaf. This is about the serving spoon. Kaf shemachnisim lekli rishon, the serving spoon that we put into the kli rishon. The serving spoon that we put into the pot that is either on the fire or it's taken off the fire with intention to put it back on the fire. And you dip the serving spoon into there. That's what we're talking about. So what is this spoon? What kli is it? What din? What law does it have? Is it a kli rishon or is it a kli sheni? So he said it depends, and it's in most cases we would give it a kli rishon status. Would be even if machmir. Let's see. If the serving spoon was left in the kli rishon long enough to be hot as the kli rishon, then they give the spoon the din of the kli rishon. It makes sense that the spoon is going to get the same temperature as the pot, and therefore the spoon has the din of a kli rishon. A kli rishon cooks, and therefore you would not be allowed to put this water with a food that you're not allowed to cook. The water or whatever the liquid that comes out of the spoon that's in the serving spoon. We said even if it was there not for a long time, this serving spoon wasn't left in the pot for a long time. It was just stuck into the hot pot. So then we should be machmir, we should be strict, and we should consider it still to be a kli rishon. So the serving spoon is like a extension of the pot. The pot and the serving spoon kind of go together. That's why sometimes a kli rishon, sometimes a kli sheni. So if it was not put in there into the hot for a long time, it was just in there for a little while, still we would give it a kli rishon status. And the only time he said that we would give it a kli sheni status is that if we pour from there into a third bowl, into a third vessel, which would be the soup bowl. And with regards to questionable foods, like whether they're kaleh bishul or not, like bread, So we'd be able to put bread into the bowl, or things that you're allowed to put into a kalish lishi. Anything that you could put into a kalish lishi, you could put into the bowl that the serving spoon was put into. So there's a chumrah and there's a kula. The strictness is that even if it was there in the serving spoon was put into the pot for a short period of time, we still want to give it the din of kli rishon. And the kula, the leniency is that even the leniency is that once we pour from this ladle into a bowl, so then the bowl, we're not going to consider the bowl a kli sheni, we would consider the bowl to be a kli shlishi. And that's the leniency. We touched on putting the ladle back in, the serving spoon back into the hot pot. So he says that you may be allowed to return the spoon with its contents into the kli rishon. This is a point of possible controversy. Okay, Dalid. The next level down is we're going in order from hottest to coldest. So the hottest, we said, was a pot that was on the fire or is removed from the fire with intention to put it on. The second level, we have a pot that was taken off of the fire permanently. And those are kli rishon. And the next level down from kli rishon is irui kli rishon. That's what pours out of the kli rishon. Pouring is called irui. What's poured out, let's see. Halikuach sheba mikli nikra b'shem irui. The pourings that come out from the kli rishon are called irui. Irui kli rishon, haynu halikuach sheba mikli rishon, kol zman she'adayin lo munach b'kli hasheni, yesh lav din shel kli rishon. So this pouring, even though, let's say this is what we're learning, even though it's hit the air, it's left the pot, it's went through the air in the pouring. That pouring that's going through the air, the pourings is still hot enough to cook. It's still called kli rishon. The kol davar she'asur litein lekli rishon she'usar me'al ha'esh, asur la'arot alav mikli rishon. Anything. So it's pretty simple. Anything that we learned that you're not allowed to put into a kli rishon, you're also not allowed to pour from a kli rishon onto that food. Shegam irui mevashel k'tzat, because the pouring can also cook a little, and cooking a little, we said, is not allowed. Something that you're not allowed to cook, you're not allowed to cook even a little bit. So this pouring onto it is going to cook it a little bit, and that's why the pouring also has the din of kli rishon. Al kain kishochlim o mashkim shnoheg behem bishul munachim bakli asur la'arot alehem bekli rishon im yeh chashash yitchamu keyad soledet bo. Therefore, if we have foods or drinks that are not allowed to be reheated, they're not allowed to be recooked or cooked or reheated on Shabbat, and they're in a bowl or a dish, you're not allowed to pour from a hot pot onto those foods. Like we said, if there's any possibility that through this pouring, that any part of the food that you're pouring onto could become yad soledet, could reach the temperature of yad soledet. Afilu rak l'rega. Even if it's only for a moment, it will reach yad soledet. You're not allowed to pour from a kli rishon onto it. כשנותנים לקרח חמין ודברים ששייך בישול, יש ליתן החמין תחילה. Here is one general rule, a guide for any time you have hot liquids and you have food on Shabbat. So now you want to mix the hot liquid with the food. So the resulting thing will or may not become yad soledet. But he said the rule is yesh liten achamin tchila. Always put the hot water first into the bowl. So during the week we would want to have to probably put the food and pour the hot water onto it so that the hot water doesn't cool off in the bowl first. But on Shabbat we do the opposite. We always want to put the hot water into the bowl first, or into the cup, into the bowl, and then you put the food or whatever you're going to put into the water. That way you have already kalish sheni. The water was already poured into a second vessel. It won't be the pouring of a first vessel. It will be already the contents of a second vessel, and then you could put then you would put the foods that you want to reheat into there. לפיכך נוהגים שאחר שמדיחים כלי מנגבים אותו תחילה קודם שמערים לתוכו מכלי ראשון. שאם מחמם הרירוי עם המים שעדיין נשארו בתוכו. So this is the case where you're sitting at the table on Shabbat and they're about to bring the hot soup, or they're about to bring the food, the chicken, whatever it is, and steaming hot coming off the fire. And you notice on your dish is still wet. It just came out of being washed. And it was brought to the table and it's still a little bit wet. So now we have a major problem with the wetness that's on the dish. As soon as, let's see. שלא יחמם העירוי את המים שעדיין נשארו בתוכו. So that when you pour the hot food, whether it's you're pouring food or you're pouring liquids, you're pouring hot stuff onto this clean dish, it should be fine. But the clean dish has water on it still. That is not allowed. That's cooking. You'd be cooking the water on the dish. שלא יחמם העירוי את המים שעדיין נשארו בתוכו. בדיעבד, במקום שאי אפשר לנגבו כגון בקבוק שפיו צר ואין יכולים להגיע אל תחתית הכלי, יש להתיר גם בלי ניגוב, אבל בזה יש להיזהר להראות ממנו תחילה כל הטיפין שבו. So we just said by a dish, if you have a wet dish, you have a dish that has still water drops on it, you must dry off the dish. Say, don't bring me the chicken yet. Don't pour my food onto my plate. It's a little bit wet. Let me dry off my plate first, and then pour the hot foods onto the plate. So now we just discussed drops of water. So when you have drops of water that you're not allowed to pour hot water onto, so he says it depends. If it's possible to reach the water, it's possible to clean off, to dry off all the drops, that's what you must do. What if the drops are in a bottle, he says? במקום שאי אפשר לנגבו כגון בקבוק, פיו צר. It has a tsar piv. It's a bakbuk, it's a bottle. You can't go in there and stick the towel in there and clean out all of the drops that are in the bakbuk, in the bottle. So in that case, yesh le'atir gam b'li nigu. He says in that case it would be okay. You'd be allowed to pour the hot water or hot contents onto this water. Into this bottle that still has drops of water in it. But he says, be very careful. Shake out all the drops first. He says, be careful. Don't just pour. Say, it's the drops in the bottle. I can't get to the drops. Really, you're supposed to dry off all of those drops. But if they're in a place where you can't get to, so you just shake them out. Just do the best you can. Get rid of the drops inside the bottle as much as you can. And then, he says, and then it's okay. So what if these drops were already cooked once? So they're still hot, they were cooked already once, and for sure then that's not a problem. Okay, he's going into a more complex thing there. And that was Dalid, Irui Kli Rishon, the pouring of a Kli Rishon. So we said the pouring of contents from a Kli Rishon has the same laws. Yes, Irui Mikli Rishon, yesh lo oto dinim shel Kli Rishon, oto isur has the same isur and the same prohibition and laws as the Kli Rishon. Whatever you're pouring from. This is because the Irui, the pouring, can also cook somewhat. Therefore, if any foods or liquids that are not allowed to be recooked, reheated on Shabbat, or in a container or a dish, we're not allowed to pour from a kli rishon, from a hot pot, onto those foods, because those are foods that we're not allowed to cook on Shabbat, or not allowed to reheat them on Shabbat. So you would not be allowed to pour onto them on Shabbat either from a hot pot, the kli rishon. All this we said, if there's a possibility, they'll get cooked to yad soleret, and even if just for a moment. We said when you pour into a container foods that cannot be cooked or reheated on Shabbat, so you should always put the liquid first, because once you put in the liquid first, so now it would be a kli sheni. That was the rule that we gave. If you have hot liquids and foods, these are going to be mixed. So on Shabbat we reverse the normal order. We put in the hot water first, in order that it should cool off from the walls of the vessel, the way that the kli rishon and the kli sheni, the way that we're going to get into that, we're going to see why is it that the kli sheni eno kli shlishi eno mevashel, kli sheni eno mevashel like kli rishon. It's because as soon as it hits the second vessel, as soon as the fluids in the foods hit the walls of the vessel, so they cool off a little bit. So that's why he gave this general guideline. So always, if you put in the hot water first, so that it will cool off a little from the walls of the bowl or the cup, and then it would be kli sheni, and then you would put the contents after the water. Therefore, we said after washing a dish, we need to dry it off first before pouring hot food from a kli rishon onto the wet dish. This would cook the drops of water that are on the dish or in the cup, wherever they are. And when I'm personally at the table and I have a dish, I always make sure that my dish is completely dry from any drops of water before putting the cholent onto the dish or any hot foods. Continuing on, kli sheni. Kli sheni, that is the second vessel. Achar shekvar munach b'kli hasheni, achar ha'irui chal alav shem shel kli sheni. After it was already poured into the second vessel, it now has a new name. It now has the name of a kli sheni, a second vessel. V'nifka'im imenu kol dinei kli rishon. And all of the laws of kli rishon, all the strictnesses of this hot pot that was on the fire, the kli rishon, they all fall off. So even if it's still hot, it's kli sheni, it's a bowl, it has something, food that was put into a second and poured into another container. Yeah, it's still hot in there, but it doesn't have any more of the power to cook something. The reason that for the leniency of the kli sheni, the leniency of a second vessel, that we said it doesn't cook, it doesn't have the power to cook, is because that whatever you put in there, into the bowl, into the second container, it's already cooled off through its contact with the walls of the vessel. The contact with the walls of the bowl, of the cup, or whatever it is, they reduce the power, the temperature of the water, whatever is in there, and now it has a different temperature, has a different status. It doesn't have any more status of kli rishon, which can cook. It has now a status of kli sheni, which cannot cook, the second vessel. אבל מובן ששייך לומר כן רק בדברים המושפעים מקירות דופן הכלי. והיינו משקיעים וכדומש נוגעים בכל מקום הדופן. So it goes without saying almost that this idea of something being poured into a second container and the second container cools it off by being in contact with the walls of the container, So it only applies, זה רק שייך למשהו שבאמת ייגע בקירות של הכלי. If it only applies if something will actually be in contact and touch the walls of the kli. היינו משקים, like liquids, וכדומה שנוגעים בכל מקום הדופן. That the liquids, as soon as you pour a liquid into a cup, it touches the entire walls of the cup are all touching the water. That's what does it. That's what brings down the power of the heat of the water. אבל דבר גוש, כגון חתיכת בשר, תפוחי אדמה, אורז וכדומה. But what about a potato or a chunk of potato, a piece of meat, rice? אף שמלכים בכלי שני, אין דופן הכלי יכול להשפיע עליהם. שהכלי הקר רק יכול לקרם במקום נגיעתם בכלי. So it's different with the potato or with if you have a davar gush, it's called a salad, a chunk of food. You take a chunk of food and I put it into the second bowl. So it's not touching the walls of the bowl. Only the part that's touching touching the bowl is going to get cooled off, but the rest of it is going to stay steaming hot. And now I have a steaming hot potato on my dish. The dish should be a kli, the second vessel. We say the second vessel doesn't cook. But now I have this steaming hot potato on my dish. The hot potato does not go down in rank. It stays at kli rishon. It does not go down to kli sheni. Even though it's in or on the kli sheni, it still remains a kli rishon. אבל דבר גוש כגון חתיכת בשר אורז וכדומה. אף שמונחים בכלי שני, אין דופן הכלי יכול להשפיע עליהם, שהכלי הקר יכול רק לקרם במקום נגיעתם בכלי, שהוא חלק מועט מהגוש. ועל כן דנים אותו ככלי ראשון. And therefore, the davar gush, a salad, will not lose its status, will not become kli rishon, kli sheni, when you put it into a dish. It still remains a kli rishon. Hot potato is like a hot pot. A hot piece of meat is like a hot pot. So what if I have half? So what if I have it's like liquid, there are pieces of meat in the liquid, but they're still surrounded by liquid. He says that's okay. דבר גוש שיש עמו משקים כגון בשר שיש עמו רוטב שקוע בתוכו נותנים לו דין של כלי שני. So if it has gravy, if it's a chunk of potato but it's surrounded by gravy, so now the gravy is going to touch all around in the container and it's going to cool off by the container, and that will cool off the potato also that's in the container. So we're only talking about if you have someone served you onto your plate a chunk of meat or a chunk of potato, some rice. That's not going to touch the rest of the kli, and there's no liquid, so that you have to keep it the din of a kli rishon. We have to be machmir and be strict and consider it like a pot of food that's on the fire that could cook something with the davar gush. But if it has some liquid in there, mixed in with liquid, so then it's considered like liquid and it takes the din of a kli sheni. And when we're going to talk about the third vessel, that there are some things that let's see, we'll cross it when we get there. So what if I take the potato, I take it now from my plate, from the second vessel, now I put it onto a third one. So does that help? No, it doesn't help, because the potato is still staying roasting hot. Okay, so now we're learning kli sheni, the second vessel. What is the law of the second vessel? You're allowed to put in there, into the second vessel, the kli sheni, anything that is not in the category of kalei habishul. It's not in the category of things that are easily cooked. There's a list of things. There's some controversial things on that list of things that are easily cooked. Those things are not allowed to be put into a kli sheni. But anything else that's not on any other foods, any other liquids or foods that are not considered kalei habishul, specifically things that are specifically very easily cooked, So all of those other kinds of foods you would be allowed to put into a klisheni. This is a klisheni, eno mevashel, even if it's hot, even if it's, let's see. Shebe'elu shayach gam bishul b'klisheni, that those things that are in the category of kalei bishul, we learned about this in the previous shiurim. We learned a section about kalei bishul, things that are easily cooked, and here we have it. Here we're applying those things that are easily cooked, that are on the list in the category of kalei bishul. Those you're not allowed to put even into a second vessel, because they will get cooked in there, because they're very easily cooked. We gave examples. כן אסור ליתן כלי ביצים, דגים, מלוחים כדומה, וכן נוהגים שלא ליתן פת, או צנומים, מצה לתוך כלי שני, כגון לתוך מרק וכולי, אם עדיין יד צוללת בו. So the examples of kalei bishul, things that are easily cooked, the examples are that we're not allowed to put into a kli sheni. Anything else you would be allowed to. The things you're not allowed to is kalei bishul. We gave examples. He gave a few here. Beitzim, eggs. An egg is something that cooks instantly when it hits the hot water. Dagim meluchim, salted fish, also very sensitive to getting cooked. Kadome, tea leaves. Tea leaves is one of the classic kalei bishul. That only those things we would not be allowed to put into the klisheni. Anything else you would be allowed to. The same thing he says, bread. And matzah also is the minhag, nohagim, that it's customary not to dip bread or matzah or bread foods into a klisheni, into a second vessel. So we touched on this a little while ago in today's shiur, and we said that if the soup was served with a serving spoon, then we'll be lenient on the serving spoon status, and we'll allow you to consider the bowl to be a kli shlishi, that we'll see that in there you're allowed to dip the bread. But if you poured from the pot into the bowl without a serving spoon, so now the bowl would be kli sheni. אם מישהו מוזג ישר מהמחבת ישר לתוך קערה, הקערה הזה כלי שני, and it has the heat of a kli sheni, and the minhag here, he says the minhag, we do not put bread. Bread is something that was baked, and now it's going to get cooked. We said you can bake after baking, or cook after cooking, but you can't cook after baking, and vice versa. So now we have this bread. If I put it into something liquid that can cook, I'll be cooking after baking, and that's not allowed on Shabbat. I'll be cooking the bread. And therefore, the bread can only be dipped into the soup, according to what we're saying, if the soup was served with a serving spoon, and that turns the bowl into a third vessel. And then you would be allowed to dip your bread. According to what he said here, you would be allowed to dip your bread into the third vessel, only if a serving spoon was used. And that's all talking about Yad Yad Solet Bo, or all these dinim, like we said, I repeat, we're talking about that it's hot. If it's noticeably cooled off, it's just warm, those have no dinei bishul, those don't cook anything. We're talking about they're still hot. Because the bread, some say is also kalei bishul, and it could get cooked in the kli sheni. So we said a kli sheni, the second vessel, that's what we're learning now. You can put anything in there except for kalei bishul, except for things that are easily cooked. And there is an opinion that bread is one of those things that can be easily cooked. And therefore, that's one of the things that we don't put into a kli sheni. Like we just said, Nevertheless, if you use the serving spoon for the soup and you serve the serving from the serving spoon into the bowl, and then you would be allowed. And likewise, there are those that are refrained from pouring salt into a kli sheni, if it's yad soledet bo, into a kli sheni. So if I have, again, let's take the example, if I had soup in a pot and I poured from the pot into the bowl, that's a kli sheni. It could cook certain things that could be cooked easily, and Melach is saying that the custom is yesh nimneim that yesh nimneim l'ten melach misug shelo nitbashel adayin. Okay, so the salt, he gives here a differentiating. So the salt, if the salt was cooked or pasteurized, whatever, however the salt is pre-cooked. If our salt today, I'm not sure, I'm not an expert in how they make the salt, but if the salt was already boiled, it was already cooked, so that salt is okay. That salt, that's already cooked once. There's no problem with cooking, recooking that salt that was cooked. But if you have a raw salt that was specifically not cooked yet, so now it's a special raw salt. So there are those that refrain from putting that salt into the kli sheni because they would consider it to be kalei bishul, that is easily cooked, and things that are easily cooked, those are the things that we're not to put into a kli sheni when it's still hot. Klalo shel davar, kol davar shu bechlal kalei bishul asur liten bekli sheni. The general rule is that anything that is of the category of kalei bishul, things that are easily cooked, we're not allowed to put into a kli sheni. על כן, כיוון שיש הרבה דברים שהם בכלל כלי הבישול, קשה לדע אלו הדברים נכללים בזה, שנזהרים ליתן בכלי שני כל דבר ששייך בו בישול חוץ ממים. And here we come into a very interesting controversy, an area of care, area of caution. See, what foods are in the category of איזה מאכלים נקרא כלי הבישול ואיזה לא, איזה כן ואיזה לא. As yesh rishiba, there is a list which things are kalei bishul, which things are not kalei bishul, and it's not so clear exactly what's what goes into what category, and which things could possibly be kalei bishul. And so for that reason, we don't just start putting things into a kli sheni. We say kli sheni eno mevashel. Oh, be careful! It can cook things that can easily be cooked. So I don't know. Is this thing maybe yes, maybe no? So therefore, he says, yesh nizharim. Some people are careful. Militen v'kli sheni kol davar sheyach bo bishul chutz mimayim. That they won't put anything into anything that could be cooked. That you're not allowed to cook on Shabbat. Let's say they will not put them into a kli. Anything that you're not allowed to cook on Shabbat. People will not put it into a kli sheni except for water. So that's because that's this idea. We don't know which things you're allowed to, which things you're not allowed to. So just don't do kli sheni. If it's kli sheni, it's a hot second vessel. Watch out. And know what you're doing, and only put things in there that are not in the category of kalei bishul. And if you don't know, then just refrain. That's what he's saying. במקום מקום יש להקל ליתן כלי שני דבר לח שכבר נתבשל אפילו אחר שכבר נצטנן. But what if we have these other, we said in the previous shiurim, bishul achar bishul, that there's no cooking after cooking. But we said with liquids, if the liquid cooled off, then you're not allowed to recook it because it cooled off already. You're not allowed to recook it. But in a kli sheni, you're allowed to. So if you have a liquid that's it's already cooled off, you're not allowed to reheat it in a normal way on Shabbat and in a place where it would get very hot. But you would be able to put into a kli sheni this davar lach, this liquid wet food that was already cooked once, but it cooled off. So we said you're not allowed to reheat it in a normal way, but you could put it into a kli sheni. ליתן חלב שעדיין לא נתבשל, וכן שאר משקים כגון מיץ לימון, וכן אפילו לימון עצמו בכלי שני, אף שהרבה מחמירים בזה, יש למקל בזה, על מי לסמוך. So there's all these questions come up. What about a lemon? What about raw milk? What about so you're not allowed to cook a lemon on Shabbat. It's raw. You're not allowed to cook it. You're not allowed to cook milk on Shabbat. But if I put it into something that won't cook, so that's allowed. So what about a kalish? A kalish says it won't cook. So he's being this sefer. He brings a leniency. He wants to say that possibly with those things you could be lenient. Ten chalav shenan bashel chalav gon mitz limon v'ken afilu limon atzmo b'kli sheni af she'arbeh machmirim b'zeh. Even though many people are strict not to put a lemon into a kli sheni. So let's say that would be your hot water in the cup that you poured from the hot water urn. Not to put a lemon in there. He's saying it's okay, but many are strict not to put the lemon in there. Or other juices, but he says somebody does. If you see somebody doing this, that they have who to rely on, that it's not so terrible. It's a kalish, and these things are not things that are not cooked quickly and easily, not kalei bishul. You're allowed to put them in. So that's the example that he gave with putting a piece of lemon into the hot drink. By the way, we talk about hot drinks. There's a seif coming up. How to make tea b'Shabbat, and we'll get there. B'ezrat Hashem in the next year, which we're finishing up over here for today. Put spices into the kli sheni, no problem. כן מותר לחמם שם בקבוק שיש בו משקים שעדיין לא נבשלו, ואפילו אוכל יש לומר שמותר לחמם בכלי שני. You could put a bottle in there, a bottle of raw food, a bottle of milk into the kli sheni, and nothing's going to happen. It's not going to get cooked. It's allowed. אפילו אם יגיע שם לשיעור של יד צולדת, and he gives here a very interesting point that once you're talking about the kli sheni and you have the bakbuk, so even if it's hot, the kli sheni, we said it's hot. So even if the bottle is going to heat up over there so hot that it'll be yad soledet, that's because we have the key of the kli sheni. B'tnai shelo yeh b'vadai mikalei bishul, and the only condition is that it should not be in the category of kalei bishul, of things that are easily cooked. So he says also we're talking about putting a bottle into water to heat up the contents of the bottle. So he said, don't put the bottle all the way surrounded by the water, because we have dinei atmana, we have the laws of wrapping on Shabbat, and this is going to come into play that you could be wrapping the bottle in the water. So therefore, don't put all of it in the water. To leave a little bit of the bottle should be floating, should be on the surface of the water, and the rest of the bottle in the water. The last name above. So now we have a lesser. We just said kli sheni is that you're allowed to cook anything except for kalei bishul. What about if I now further pour from the kli sheni and I pour it into a kli shlishi? Let's see. The pouring of a second vessel has the law of a third vessel. So now we're talking about the third vessel, the kalish lishi. A kalish lishi, a third vessel, he says here you're allowed to put anything in there except for something that you know for sure that it's on kalei bishul. We just said kalei bishul, that the category of things that are easily cooked is controversial. We don't know what items yes, what items not. So anything is doubtful, go ahead, put it in the kalish lishi. You have a third cup. That means you put from one cup into another, from the urn into a cup, and then into a third cup. This third cup is not going to cook anything except for something that is for sure kalei bishul. That is definitely known as kalei bishul, as things that can be cooked easily, very quickly and easily. So now, what about a kalish lishi? So we said beitza is for sure is kalei bishul. Beitza is egg is one of the things that we know is kalei bishul, is the thing that gets cooked quickly and easily. So you're not allowed to put the egg even into a third vessel. If it's hot and it could reach the yad, so let it go. ורוצה רק לחממה, אין היתר רק באופן שלא יוסיף בישולה, והיינו שאין הכלי שלישי חם כל שיכול להוסיף. So that was kli shlishi. So let's just review the kli sheni and kli shlishi. Now we finished for today. So what is it with the din of kli sheni? We said it's permissible to put into a kli sheni anything that is not from the categories of kalei bishul. We learned that kalei bishul 2 classes ago. We learned that those are the category of things that are easily cooked. The examples we gave, some examples: eggs, salted fish, tea leaves. These may not be put into a kli sheni. And for those foods, we can only put them into a kli shlishi, but except for foods that we know for sure are kalei bishul, then even a kli shlishi won't help. It is also customary not to dip bread or matzah into a hot bowl of soup, we said, a kli sheni, because some poskim consider this to be kalei bishul, foods that are easily cooked. Bread is kalei bishul to some poskim, and to others it's not. So that's why he says it's okay to dip the bread into the soup if the soup was poured with a serving spoon. So now you have the pot of soup, the serving spoon, and the bowl of soup would now become a third vessel with regard to the bread. Similarly, we said we refrain from people, so many people refrain from pouring salt into a hot bowl of soup, salt that's raw salt that was not cooked, a certain type of salt that's not cooked. You would not put that into a hot bowl of soup if the soup is yad, so let it. Some people refrain. The rule is that anything that can be considered as kalei bishul, easily cooked, are not allowed to be placed into a hot kli sheni. Anything else that is not kalei bishul is you're allowed to put it into the kli sheni, because we say in general the kli sheni eino mevashel. A bottle with raw liquids, a baby bottle, for example, can be warmed up in a kli sheni, because the kli sheni only cooks foods that are kalei bishul. The bottle, what's in the bottle, the liquid, will not become hot, will not become yad soledet bo, so you'd be able to put it in there. But he said with the bottles not to fully immerse the bottle into the kli sheni because of laws of hatmana, of wrapping foods for warmth. Then we said we went on to kli sheni, irui kli sheni, and kli shlishi, pouring from a second vessel. So we said and the third vessel. So we said the pourings from a kli sheni, a second vessel, have the status of a third vessel. Kli sheni, pourings, irui kli sheni, yesh lo din shel kli shlishi. The rule is what's a kli shlishi. So what is the law of a kli shlishi of the third vessel? It's kli shlishi eino mevashel. A third vessel does not cook foods, not cook normal foods. So what in this sefer Kitzur Hot Shabbat is there is controversy. I remember learning the different back and forth with the kli shlishi, and this is questionable. Some poskim say that no, anything you can put anything a kli shlishi eino mevashel klal. That means klal, the kli, once it's in the third vessel, it can't cook anything, even kalei bishul. It can't cook anything. When you say the psak is here from the sefer, that he's saying is that something that you know is kalei bishul. We gave the example of an egg. So an egg you can't put it even into a kli shlishi because it could be cooked so easily. So you wouldn't put an egg even into a third vessel, because we're afraid that since it's cooked so easily, even a third vessel doesn't have cooking power, but for this egg, it may cook it a little bit, and therefore we would not put it into the kli shlishi, or anything that is specifically we know is on the list of kalei bishul. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for joining. The next shiur, Bezrat Hashem, will be continuing through the Hilchot Bishul. We'll be learning how to make tea on Shabbat, Ech lasot tea, lasot hagasa b'Shabbat, stirring a pot. That's stirring a pot on Shabbat. Reheat, hadachat kelim, how to washing the dishes on Shabbat. Cooking through a non-Jew on Shabbat, and also avar ubishel, foods that were cooked on Shabbat by mistake, and what you have to do with the food. Hope to see you all next time. Don't forget to subscribe, and Shabbat Shalom to everyone.